Hello, everyone, and welcome to this guide for workers and resources, Soviet Republic, with me, Mangy Panda. In today's guide, we're going to be covering power. So first off, let's go through the various buildings that we have. So if we come down here to electricity, you'll see we have all our power plants here, medium voltage lines, high voltage lines, and then various different miscellaneous things. So to start off with power plants, you have coal power plants. You have your early start version and your modern version, and you move on to the oil power plant. Nuclear, you have the single reactor, the double reactor, and the Zaporizhzhia reactor. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. This comes from the Ukrainian DLC. Then you have your two different cooling towers. This one comes from the Ukrainian DLC. This is the standard one. Now, your nuclear reactors will need to be connected to a cooling tower. That is done through the tab here with build cooling pipes. And if you come in and you look, so on your cooling towers, you do have inputs like here and here. You have outputs here and here. Same thing on your reactors. So output, input. The single reactor will need to be connected to one cooling tower. The twin reactor will need to connect it to two, and you just run it in a loop so that it comes out into the cooling tower and then back into the reactor. Then we move on to our renewables. So you have your solar farm, your large windmill, and your small windmill. And then finally we have your basic methods for transporting power around your republic. You have your medium voltage switches, which come in three variety. You have the 3 connection switch, the 5 connection switch, and the priority switch. If your high voltage switches here, you have the 3 connection, the 6 connection, and the priority. You have the power transformer, which allows you to step down your power. And then you have your basic, all of your power lines. So they are broken down into medium voltage and high voltage, and there are different amounts of power that they transport. So if we come in here and we look at our medium voltage wires right here, starting from left to right, we go with the 0.65 megawatt wire. Then we move to the 1.2 and 1.5, and finally the largest medium voltage wire, the 2.35. Then if we go on to the high voltage, we start with the 4 megawatt wire. Then we go to the 6, the 8 megawatts, the 10 megawatt, the 13 megawatt, 14, the 15, and finally the largest that we have is the 18 megawatt wire. Now real quick, let's cut to a different video and we'll take a look at the research that's going to be required to unlock any of this for you. So what researches are going to be required in order for you to use power? Well, there's going to be some different things depending on whether or not you play in early start or not. There are going to be some things that are going to need to be researched regardless. So to start off with, if you're playing in early start, 1934 gives you access to the research for modern electrical pylons, which will unlock your various bigger medium voltage and high voltage wires, as well as a couple of the high voltage underground wires. It will not give you access to the biggest high voltage wire, the 18 megawatt. That is unlocked in 1934. But in addition, you will have to research the steel line right here. So metallurgy, steel fatigue, and steel cables. Even if you're not playing an early start, you'll still need to research all this in order to unlock the 18 megawatt power lines. But all the rest of them will be unlocked at the start of the game. Now for your various power plants, you start off with the ability to do a coal power plant. Anything else requires research. So nuclear power plants, you must research through the nuclear line right here, regardless of early start or not. If it's in early start, you will be locked behind these various years. So up until 1946, you cannot actually have a nuclear power plant. Previous to that, you can still get unlocked the various researches for your nuclear science faculty, your geology faculty, uranium mining, uranium separation, uranium enrichment, nuclear fuel, the RBMK reactor, and then finally the nuclear power project. Even if you aren't playing in early start, you will need to research all of these as well. For your renewables, these will need to be researched regardless of early start or not. It just, the years they're locked behind. So 1948 for wind power, 1961 for solar power. And then your gas power plant has to be researched either way, but is locked until 1959 for early start. In addition to that, if we come down here to our concrete line, modern industry will unlock all your modern versions of like the coal plant and your electrical substations. So until 1958 and you do the concrete utilization study, you won't be able to use those in early start. The other thing that you would possibly need to research is if we come down here. Where is it? Sorry, it's back up here. My bad. Right here. The power grid connection with Soviet countries or Western countries. This allows you to put a power line connection anywhere along the border for either the Soviet countries or the Western countries. You will need to research this every single time you want to build one. So if you want to have multiple power connections along the border to be selling power or importing power into cities that are located big distance away from your starting city, you'll need to research this each time you want to put one down. Okay, so how much power do you need? How much power do you produce? How much power can your power lines move? If you look at the game, it tells you power in two different descriptions. It gives you megawatt hours and megawatts. So how do you correlate those? Or how do you figure that out? Well, it's simple. You take your megawatt hours and you divide it by 60, and that tells you how many megawatts that you're producing or consuming per day. So for example, if we look at this guy right here, which is our early start coal power plant, we'll see that his maximum production per workday is 600 megawatts. So what that means is if he's operating at 100% all day long, the most power he can generate is 10 megawatts. So there's no reason to come in here and connect him up with a 14 megawatt wire or 18 or anything bigger than a 10 megawatt wire, because he will never produce more than 10 megawatts in a single day. So this will handle that power production as much as you want forever. There's no reason to have anything bigger. Same thing, you can take any of these, just divide by 60, and that will tell you how many megawatts they produce per day, so you know what size wire to connect. Now, consumption is a little bit different, okay? If you look at a building, so let's come in here, let's look at our shopping center right here. So it says that its maximum power consumption per day is 4.7 megawatt hours, okay? That is assuming that for the entire day, it is running at 100%. It is fully staffed all day long, which we know is never going to happen. Okay. For your residential buildings, so this one right here uses 3 megawatt hours. That's assuming that it has max occupancy. Same thing with your industries. If we come over here to the food factory, in order to use it 7.6 megawatts per megawatt hours per day, it has to be operating at 100% efficiency, 170 workers, 24 hours a day. So you're not going to hit the maximum consumption for an entire day, except for from your residentials, because odds are your residentials are going to be full, but all the rest of your buildings, you're never going to be staffed 100% all day, every day. So you're probably, depending on where you're at in your republic, you're probably going to run 80, 90%. That's just a good rule of thumb. If you want to sit down and want to do the math of exactly how much power you're consuming in the various areas. Okay. So where do you need power? Okay. It's not as straightforward of a question I'm sorry, it's not as straightforward of an answer as you would think, because there are some buildings that always need power. There are some buildings that sometimes need power. And then there are buildings that just never need power. So what's the difference? All right, so if we come over to here, buildings that always need power, okay? Residential units. If you don't have power in your residential unit, then your citizens' happiness will plummet rather rapidly and they will flee your republic. Okay? City services, so shopping centers, hospitals, police stations, fire stations, all those have to have power. Without power, they don't operate. They don't do whatever it is that they're providing. So your hospital won't work, your grocery store won't work, etc. Industries. So any building where your citizens work, so mines, factories, all of that stuff, without power, they don't operate. They don't produce. Okay. So those are all the types of buildings where you have to have power. Buildings where you sometimes need power. Storages. Okay. You can load and unload this storage without power. The only difference is that unloading the storage without the power operates much slower than if you had power there. Same thing with your cargo stations. They work without power. It's just they work much faster when they have power. And construction offices, technical service offices, distribution offices, those type of things, you only need to provide power to them if you want to use their internal fuel tank. Okay, and you want to be able to have all the vehicles parked in here, refuel here instead of having to drive to like a gas station. Okay, if you're perfectly happy with them driving to a gas station, you don't need to provide power to these guys. They can sit out in the middle of nowhere, no power, and they will operate just fine. Buildings that don't need power, things like road depots, stuff like that, where you're just parking stuff. How do we transport power to where we need it? Okay, so first off, where are you going to get your power? You can either get power from a border connection like this, which is what you're going to start off with in the beginning of the game. And you simply come in here, make sure you're on import. This is how you either sell or purchase power. And we just crank this up all the way. Now what this does is this sets the maximum amount of power that you can import from the border. You will only import the amount of power that you are currently using within your republic. You will not import more power than you're going to use. You don't have to just crank it up all the way. You don't have to worry about it. Same thing eventually if you go to sell. If you're producing your own power and you want to sell the excess, crank it up all the way. The game is only going to export your surplus power. Once all of your domestic needs are met, then the surplus power that's connected to the border crossing will be sold. You don't have to worry about selling all of your power and then not being able to power your local area. So just crank it up all the way. It's easier that way. Now, if you look at this border connection, and it's going to be the same for all of our power plants. You have, if we come in here, you have high voltage connections, and then you have medium voltage connections. But again, how do we get the power from here to here? You don't have to power each individual building with its own power connection, though there are some buildings that have direct power connections, such as the steel mill. What you would be using for that is the electric substation, which is right here. So you have two versions, well actually four, but you have the early start version, which is built using bricks, and the modern version, which uses prefab panels. And both of these have connections, ones that have road connections. So if we come, look over here, it needs a road connection. Then you have these other ones that have footpath connections. I recommend you always use the footpath connections ones. They're just easier. So you're going to place your electric substation, and you notice the yellow lines. Okay, so that is, if there's a yellow line going to a building, that means that building is connected to this substation for power. All right, so let's see, if I move over here, that construction yard's no longer connected, so it will not receive power. If I move it right here, it's connected up. Okay, so we're going to place our substation there. Okay, so again, now you can just take a medium voltage line, because your substation, let's look at that, has 3 medium voltage connections. So you could just run a medium voltage line like that, and like that, and boom. You have power. This has power. All of our buildings have power. Now, you can do that, but if you're moving power over long distances, you want to use the high voltage lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here. Let's get rid of those. All right, so we're going to need a couple things to make that work. Okay, so first off, if we look at high voltage, we only have one connection here. Okay, so we want to be able to split this into multiple connections. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to put in a high voltage switch. Now, I recommend always using the priority switches, just because it gives you more control over your Republic. So we'll go ahead, we'll put that high voltage switch in there, and we're going to run our 18 megawatt line into here, because that's the maximum that we are importing. Okay. So from the high voltage, how do I get the high voltage to the medium voltage? That is where the power transformer comes in. So now we're going to run power transformer. We'll just put it right here for right now, and to connect from this switch to this power transformer. Now we've got a small area. We're not going to be using a lot of power, so we don't need to run an 18 megawatt line. So we're going to run, let's run a 6 megawatt line. Okay, so we're just going to pull this over to here, connect that in like so. And then from here, we are going to run to there. Now, this gives us the ability to run more high voltage lines out somewhere else to connect to other areas of our Republic, an industrial zone that's over here, another city that's over here, whatever. And if this area starts to grow, we can add more medium voltage connections. We can connect more things up because we've still got inputs here. So why did I recommend using the high voltage, the priority switch for this high voltage connection? The reason for that is you want to be able to control your inputs and your outputs. Reason is, so for your outputs, say this is connected, let's just put in a couple other lines just for fun. Okay, so we have this running off like so. So this one right here is going off to our city, this one's going off to an industrial area, this one's going off to another industrial area. We want to make sure that our city always has power, because if our industrial power areas lose power, they just stop producing for a while. If our city loses power, our citizens leave. So now if we look at this, you'll see we can set this from low priority, medium priority, high priority. And the way you tell what's what is as you mouse over them, you'll see how the lines light up. So connection 1 happens to be this one over here on the right. Connection 2 is this one in the middle. You'll see how that's lit up. And connection 3 is this one over here. So we want this connection that's going to our city to be the highest priority. And we'll say that output 3 is going someplace that we consider pretty important. Turn that to medium. And then connection 2, that can go to low, because if this doesn't get power, it's no big deal. We'd like it to get power, but we want the rest of everything else to get power first. And same thing happens with your inputs. You can set the priority on your input. So you can set the input to this particular power plant or to a particular border crossing as higher or lower priority. It comes into play if you're using like waste processing to generate power. You want to make sure you're always using that power first so that you don't jam up your waste incinerator. Right, so back to this over here. A couple things with your substations, right? So you'll notice you have total wattage of all buildings connected and estimated maximum consumption. Right now, they're both 21%. Okay, what this top one does is just what it says. So every building connected, so every building that's going to highlight yellow, what's the amount of power that it's going to use? Estimated maximum consumption. Now this is where it gets a little different, because this is based off of if you have multiple substations that connect to the same building. The game tries to even the load throughout your electrical grid. So, for example, if we took this guy, put him over here, so now he's connected to those 4 buildings. We build him. Now you notice all of a sudden we're only using 13% of our maximum power from this substation. This one is using 9% of his maximum power. Okay, if we were to add yet another one over here that's just connected to those buildings, now you notice we've dropped to 10%. Because again, the game is trying to evenly distribute the load amongst our substations. So this is why this total wattage, you can see this get sky high. It can be 3, 4, 500%, depending on how tightly your buildings are packed in together and what type of power consumption they have. The estimated maximum consumption is the one that you want to pay attention to. Okay, but remember, the power consumption of your buildings is based off of their operation. So this train platform is not going to consume its maximum amount of power unless there is always 4 trains and they're loading and unloading. Okay, this clothing factory is only going to consume its maximum amount of power if all 80 people are in there. Okay, so this can go a little bit over 100%. I really wouldn't recommend pushing it more than to like 80% or so, just because you don't want to have any issues in your power grid. But you could go over 100% and not have problems. But one of the things you need to keep in mind is this is based off of 2.5 megawatts, because that is the maximum amount of power that can be pushed through this substation. Okay, but the size of the power line you have connected also affects that, but it's not shown here. So for example, we have on this one right here, this line, it's only 2.35 megawatts. So we're not up to the maximum 2.5 megawatts. If we only had this one, we would only have 0.65 megawatts. So you have to keep the amount of power, you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at this. Now, one of the other things is you'll notice these substations have 3 connections. Okay, these are not through connections. That means you cannot daisy chain your substations. These are inputs only. So we'll see. So for right here, you see we have power. This one has no power. If we connect these up, like so, this one still has power. This one, no power. In order to give power to that one, we would need to connect it back here to our transformer. So we'll come here, like so. And now we see it has power. So why do they have multiple connections? Well, that goes back to your maximum being 2.5 megawatts, but you don't have a 2.5 megawatt line. So you could run multiple lines into the same substation to boost the power. So if we look at the underground lines, you'll notice this is a 1.8 megawatts or 1.85, and this is a 0.65. If we add those two together, that's 2.5 megawatts. So if we took and we ran this line here and this line here, this one is now operating at 100%. We are pumping all 2.5 megawatts into it. The other thing you could do is you could have multiple transformers connected to the same electric substation. Now, why would you want to do that? It's just a backup. It's a redundancy in case this catches fire. Then you have another power transformer that's still providing power to that area, and you don't run out of power. And that is it. That is the basics of power in Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. I hope you found this informative. If so, give it a like. If you want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. We will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.